A man does not always reveal love through declarations. More often, love slips out through behavior, quiet, unconscious, impossible to fake. Before words form, before intentions are confessed, the body already knows. And when a man begins to love, something subtle but irreversible starts to shift inside him. You may not hear, "I need you," but you will feel it in the way his attention reorganizes itself around you. At first, it doesn't look dramatic. It looks ordinary, almost accidental. Yet psychologically, it is anything but. He begins to adjust, not because he decided to, but because his inner world has already made room for you. His routines soften, his habits bend, his sense of time quietly recalibrates. And this is the first unconscious signal of emotional dependence. A man who does not care keeps his life rigid. A man who is falling in love begins to make space without realizing he's doing it. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Love works the same way. When a man is emotionally activated, his unconscious takes the lead long before his mouth ever catches up. You'll notice that he starts checking in, not because he's anxious, but because your presence has become a psychological reference point. Your mood subtly affects his. Your availability begins to matter more than it should if he were indifferent. This is not control. This is attunement. He listens differently, not just to your words, but to your silences. He remembers small details he never made an effort to remember before, not out of strategy, but because emotional attachment sharpens perception. In Jung's view, love activates the anima, the inner feminine principle in a man, the part responsible for emotional depth, empathy, and connection. When this awakens, a man becomes more receptive, more observant, more internally responsive. And here's the key detail most women overlook. A man does not become emotionally dependent by chasing. He becomes dependent by adjusting himself internally to your presence. When your absence begins to feel heavier than your presence once did, something has already changed. He may still act composed. He may still avoid labeling feelings. But unconsciously, his nervous system has already placed you in a position of emotional relevance. Love, at this stage, is not spoken. It is reorganized. And once a man's inner structure shifts around a woman, there is no return to neutrality. This is where real influence begins, not through persuasion, not through pressure, but through the silent gravity of emotional impact. Because when a man starts to love, his behavior changes first. His words follow later, if at all. The second shift happens even more quietly. And this is where most women begin to doubt themselves. Because it doesn't look like pursuit. It looks like containment. A man who is emotionally dependent does not always move closer. Often, he holds himself back. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels too much. His behavior becomes cautious, measured. He chooses words more carefully. He hesitates where he once acted freely. This hesitation is not indifference. It is self-regulation. The unconscious knows what the conscious mind is not yet ready to admit. Carl Jung observed that when a powerful emotion emerges, the psyche attempts to protect itself by slowing down behavior. Not to escape, but to prevent exposure. So the man who begins to love may suddenly appear restrained, less impulsive, less reckless with you. And here is the psychological truth few are taught. A man is most careful with what he fears losing. You'll notice he stops joking in certain ways, stops crossing lines he used to cross without thinking, stops treating access to you as casual. His nervous system has registered risk, and risk only exists where there is value. Emotionally detached men are careless. Emotionally invested men become precise. This precision shows up in subtle ways. He notices your reactions, adjusts his tone, recalibrates his timing. Not because he's trying to impress you, but because your response has begun to matter on a deeper level. In Jungian terms, this is the moment the shadow retreats. The part of him that acts without consequence pulls back, because something meaningful has entered the field. He may still struggle to name what he feels, but his behavior already knows. He becomes slower to disappear, more aware of rupture, more sensitive to distance. And when he does pull away, it is rarely clean. It carries tension, ambivalence, inconsistency, because emotional dependence creates conflict. The desire for closeness versus the fear of surrender. This inner tension leaks into behavior. He watches more, checks in indirectly, stays aware of your presence even in silence. This is not manipulation. It is attachment fighting for control. A man who doesn't care detaches easily. A man who is attached oscillates. And if you are paying attention, you'll feel it. Not as certainty, but as gravity. Something in him is already leaning toward you, even as his mind tries to stand still. That is love before language. The third shift is unmistakable, yet it is rarely recognized in the moment. A man in emotional dependence begins to mirror you, not consciously, not deliberately, but instinctively. Your emotional rhythm starts to echo inside him. When you withdraw, he feels unsettled, even if he pretends not to notice. When you soften, he becomes warmer. When you grow quieter, something in him grows alert. This is not coincidence. It is resonance. The unconscious mirrors what it is bonded to. Carl Jung believed that deep emotional connection activates psychic mirroring, a process where one person's inner state begins to influence the other's unconscious responses. This is how emotional bonds form beneath awareness. And this is why a man who is falling in love may feel out of sync with himself. He starts reacting to things he never reacted to before. Your absence lingers longer than it should. Your presence stabilizes him in ways he cannot explain. He may not say, "I miss you," but his behavior reveals it when your energy shifts, and his follows. Watch closely. He becomes quieter when you are quiet, more expressive when you are open, more distant when he senses emotional risk. This is not emotional immaturity. It is emotional exposure. Detached men do not mirror. They remain internally untouched. But emotional dependence rewires perception. It binds his nervous system to yours. And this is why, paradoxically, he may appear inconsistent. Because he is no longer operating from independence, but from emotional attunement he does not yet understand. In Jung's view, this is the anima's influence deepening. The part of a man that feels before it speaks, responds before it reasons. And when that part awakens, behavior becomes reactive rather than strategic. He starts watching you more than talking, not out of control, but out of orientation. You have become a psychological reference point. He may not articulate desire, but he calibrates himself around you. This is love without confession, attachment without announcement. And once mirroring begins, neutrality is gone, because no one mirrors what they do not care about. The fourth shift is where emotional dependence becomes visible through restraint. A man who is not emotionally involved speaks freely, sometimes carelessly. A man who is emotionally dependent begins to edit himself, not to impress, but to protect the bond. He pauses before responding. He reconsiders tone. He feels the weight of consequence where none existed before. This is not insecurity. It is internal investment. Carl Jung wrote that when something becomes meaningful to the psyche, the ego instinctively moves to preserve it. This preservation shows itself as inhibition, not excess. So the man who loves without words becomes less impulsive around you. He stops saying the first thing that comes to mind, stops provoking reactions just to feel powerful, stops testing limits for entertainment. Because now, the connection has weight. You may notice he avoids conflict more carefully, or, paradoxically, becomes more affected by it. A small misunderstanding lingers longer. A brief distance unsettles him more than it should. This is emotional dependence expressing itself through sensitivity. Detached men do not feel impact. They move on quickly. Emotionally bonded men feel rupture as threat. And here's the subtle but decisive sign. He starts protecting the connection even when you are not present. He speaks of you differently. He defends your absence without being asked. He internalizes your presence as part of his emotional landscape. In Jungian terms, this is introjection. You are no longer external to his psyche. You live inside his inner world now. That is why his behavior changes even when you are not watching. Because love without words is not performed. It is integrated. And once a woman is integrated into a man's inner structure, he is no longer free in the same way. Not trapped, but tethered. This is where emotional dependence becomes irreversible. Because you are no longer someone he interacts with. You are someone he carries. The fifth shift is where emotional dependence stops being reactive and becomes structural. A man who is not attached lives from impulse. A man who is emotionally bonded begins to anticipate, not because he is planning romance, but because your presence has altered his internal map. He starts thinking ahead in ways he never did before. Not grand plans, not promises, but subtle forecasting. He considers how something might affect you. He delays decisions. He adjusts choices, sometimes without realizing why. This is one of the most unconscious signs of love. Because anticipation only forms when the psyche assumes continuity. In Jung's psychology, the mind does not prepare for what it expects to disappear. It only prepares for what it assumes will remain. So when a man begins to unconsciously factor you into the future, even in small ways, emotional dependence has already taken root. You may hear it in phrases that seem casual. We'll see. Later. Next time. They sound vague, but psychologically they are significant. Detached men live in immediacy. Attached men stretch time forward. And here is the crucial detail. He does this without claiming you. Because the unconscious moves faster than identity. He may still resist definitions, still avoid labels, but behavior reveals truth before language dares to follow. You'll notice he becomes unsettled by uncertainty. Your unpredictability affects him more than it should. He prefers clarity, not control, but reassurance. Not reassurance that you belong to him, but reassurance that you are still there. As Carl Jung said, where love rules, there is no will to power. And where emotional dependence forms, control gives way to concern. He is no longer asking, "What do I want right now?" He is unconsciously asking, "What preserves this?" That is the quiet pivot. The moment a man begins to protect continuity instead of freedom, love has already crossed the threshold. And from here on, his behavior is no longer about desire. It is about preservation. Because once someone becomes part of your future, even silently, you are no longer alone inside yourself. The sixth shift is quieter than all the others, and yet it is the most revealing. A man in emotional dependence begins to self-correct, not because you demanded it, not because you explained, but because something inside him no longer allows certain behaviors to pass unchecked. He notices himself. He catches impulses mid-movement, words halfway formed, actions reconsidered. This is not obedience. It is inner alignment. Carl Jung believed that when a person internalizes a meaningful relationship, the psyche reorganizes itself around a new inner standard. The conscience sharpens, not morally, but relationally. You become that standard. He starts asking himself questions he never asked before. Was that fair? Was that careless? Did that distance mean more than I intended? And the key detail is this. He asks them without your presence. That is how you know it's real. A man who is not emotionally involved only adjusts when confronted. A man who is emotionally dependent adjusts when alone. You may notice changes you never requested. He becomes more consistent, more aware of timing, more careful with absence. Not perfect, but different. This is where emotional dependence deepens into responsibility. Not responsibility to you, but responsibility for the connection. In Jungian terms, this is integration. The bond is no longer external stimulation. It has become part of his internal order. And that is why he may grow quieter again. Because self-correction requires reflection. And reflection is not loud. He may still struggle with vulnerability, still avoid naming feelings. But his behavior begins to align with care rather than convenience. This is love without performance, without promises, without display. It is love as inner discipline. And once a man begins to regulate himself for the sake of a connection, he is no longer free to be careless. Because care has entered his character, not spoken, but installed. The seventh shift appears when emotional dependence reaches the body, not just the mind. A man in love begins to feel tension in your absence, not dramatic longing, not desperation, but a subtle restlessness he cannot place. His focus fractures more easily. Distractions don't work the way they used to. Silence carries weight. This is not obsession. It is displacement. Your absence has created a gap his nervous system now registers. Carl Jung described this as libidinal investment. When emotional energy becomes bound to a specific object, its removal creates psychic imbalance. In simpler terms, your presence regulated something inside him. And now, without you, that regulation is missing. You may notice he reaches out indirectly, not to talk about feelings, but to restore equilibrium. A question without urgency, a reaction without explanation, a casual message that carries no content, only connection. This is not boredom. It is recalibration. Men who are emotionally detached feel absence easily. Men who are emotionally dependent feel disruption. And here is the important distinction. He does not reach out to take. He reaches out to settle. Your energy has become familiar, grounding, psychologically stabilizing. In Jung's view, this is what happens when another person begins to function as an external regulator, not a crutch, but a balancing presence. That is why he may resist admitting it, because dependence threatens identity. So instead of confession, he moves toward proximity, not intimacy, proximity. Enough to feel connected, enough to calm the system, not enough to feel exposed. And if you withdraw fully, you'll notice something telling. He doesn't rush, but he doesn't forget. Because emotional dependence does not scream. It waits. It lingers in behavior, not words. And when a man begins to seek equilibrium through you, even quietly, you are no longer optional to his inner world. You are stabilizing it. That is love without language. The eighth shift reveals itself when emotional dependence collides with ego. This is where a man changes, not toward you, but within himself. He begins to feel exposed in ways he cannot explain. His confidence wavers slightly, not as weakness, but as awareness, because love introduces the possibility of loss. And for a man who values control, this is deeply unsettling. You may notice moments where he seems conflicted, drawn in, then guarded, open, then suddenly contained. This is not emotional immaturity. It is emotional confrontation. Carl Jung believed that love forces the ego to face its limits. It reveals where control ends and vulnerability begins. And most men were never taught how to stand there comfortably. So instead of saying, "I care," his psyche negotiates. He tests independence, then feels the cost of distance. He asserts autonomy, then notices the emptiness it creates. This internal push and pull is one of the clearest signs of emotional dependence. Because indifference feels clean, love feels complicated. You may sense that he becomes more private, more introspective, less performative, because something inside him is reorganizing. The old identity, the self that didn't need anyone, no longer fits the emotional reality he's experiencing. And this creates friction, not with you, but with himself. In Jungian psychology, this is the ego confronting the self, the deeper, relational truth that demands integration. That is why he may grow quieter rather than expressive. Because when love touches the core, words become insufficient. He doesn't need to announce attachment. His behavior already reveals negotiation. Negotiation between freedom and connection, between independence and belonging. And when a man struggles internally rather than acting out externally, it means the bond has reached depth. Because shallow desire never creates inner conflict. Only love does. This is the stage where emotional dependence becomes undeniable, not because he admits it, but because his identity can no longer ignore it. And once identity shifts, nothing stays the same. The ninth shift is the most paradoxical of all. A man in love begins to lose the need to prove himself to you, not because he feels secure, but because performance no longer protects him. Early attraction is loud, ego-driven, demonstrative. Emotional dependence, however, does the opposite. It quiets the need for display. You may notice he stops exaggerating, stops inflating stories, stops posturing for effect, not because he is less interested, but because something deeper has taken precedence. As Carl Jung observed, when a person feels truly seen, the persona, the social mask, loosens its grip. There is no longer a need to impress what already matters. So instead of performing strength, he reveals humanity, not through confession, but through presence. He allows pauses, silence, moments without momentum. And this is important. A man only allows stillness with someone he feels emotionally anchored to. With others, silence feels dangerous. With you, it begins to feel tolerable, even grounding. This is where love stops being about attraction and becomes about belonging. You'll sense it in how he shares space with you, not filling it, not dominating it, just staying. This is emotional dependence stripped of drama. He doesn't chase. He doesn't withdraw theatrically. He simply remains psychologically nearby, even when nothing is happening. Detached men disappear when there is no stimulation. Attached men remain because connection itself has become the point. And here lies the quiet truth. A man who loves without words does not need to convince you of his value. He feels it being reflected back to him through the bond. That reflection steadies him. In Jungian terms, this is recognition of the self through the other, not validation, recognition. And once that happens, love no longer needs to announce itself. It simply exists. Calm, present, undeniable. One final shift remains, and it is the one that changes everything. The final shift is the quietest and the most decisive. A man who truly loves without words reaches a point where he stops protecting himself from you, not through confession, not through promises, but through surrender of inner resistance. You feel it when his defenses no longer activate automatically, when distance stops being his reflex, when emotional presence no longer feels dangerous to him. This is not dramatic closeness. It is relaxation. His nervous system no longer braces around you. He doesn't brace to leave. He doesn't brace to control. He doesn't brace to impress. He simply is. Carl Jung described this as the moment when the psyche no longer splits, when inner conflict gives way to wholeness. Love, at its deepest level, does not excite. It settles. You'll notice it in the way he stays connected even when nothing is required, even when there is no reward, even when you are not giving anything. He doesn't disappear when things go quiet. He doesn't test distance to regain power. Because emotional dependence has completed its arc, you are no longer something he approaches or avoids. You are something he has accepted, and acceptance is the highest form of attachment. This is when love stops being behavior and becomes orientation. You are part of how he relates to the world now. Not owned, not claimed, integrated. This is why words become unnecessary. Because when love reaches the unconscious core, it no longer asks to be named. It simply acts. Consistently, quietly, irreversibly. And if you felt these shifts, not all at once, but gradually, unmistakably, then understand this. A man does not need to say, "I love you," to be emotionally bound. His behavior has already told the truth. And once that truth lives in the unconscious, it cannot be undone.